My name is Esben Lunde Larsen. I'm a fellow at the World Resources Institute and the Champions 12.3, and I'll be your moderator for this first webinar in a series focusing on how we can deliver on the UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 on halving food loss and waste in 2030. The webinars will all be recorded and will be available at the Champions 12.3 website. We have 4 distinguished speakers today who each have 8 minutes to enlighten us before we open for a Q&A session where you have the opportunity to be heard. You can write questions during the 4 interventions, and then our panelists will provide answers afterwards. But let me introduce our 4 participants. Liz Goodwin, Senior Fellow and Director for Food Loss and Waste at World Resources Institute. Marcus Gover, the CEO of WRAP in the UK. Ken Murphy, Group Chief Executive at Tesco. And Tristan Stewart, founder of Feedback and Toast Ale. But without further ado, I will give the floor to Liz Goodwin. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Tristram, and hello, everybody. And it's great to see so many people here today. We're here to talk about progress in the UK, but we should really start by talking about some of the global numbers and then look at the UK within that overall picture. So globally, we know that around 1/3 of food is lost or wasted before it's eaten, and that accounts for around 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is 6 times aviation, just to put it in context. So it's, we talk a lot about cutting down our fuel and our fuel usage and aviation flights, but we don't talk a lot about food waste. It costs the global economy at nearly $1 trillion every year. And these levels of food loss and waste mean that we waste around 1/4 of the water that's used in agriculture. And let's remember that agriculture actually uses up around 70% of fresh water anyway. So that's an astonishing amount of water that's wasted. And food loss and waste accounts for 80% of global biodiversity loss. And every single country wastes food. Every time we throw away food, we are throwing away water, land, energy, carbon, and the time that was put into producing it. And it's fair to say that we will not create a sustainable food system unless we tackle food loss and waste. And we won't achieve greenhouse gas emission targets unless we tackle food loss and waste. And we won't stop biodiversity loss unless we tackle it. In the UK, we started seriously working on food waste probably around 15 years ago. And we started with measurement because we just knew we didn't understand it. And the research and the work done by WRAP really put the UK on the map in terms of understanding how much food was being wasted in the UK, where it was being wasted. Was it in households? Was it in the supply chain? And why was it being wasted? And the UK still probably has a better knowledge and understanding of food waste than any other country in the world, although there are clearly some who are now catching us up. The work in the UK showed that around 70% of food waste generated in the UK comes from households. So that meant it was a really important area to focus. And the other 30% comes from the supply chain, from the retailers and the hospitality sector. So they're still important, there's still a lot of food waste to go at, but the households are a significant factor in the UK. And the headline for the UK is that since that work started 15 years ago, food waste in the UK has reduced by around 27% since we started focusing on it. And Marcus in a minute is going to talk a lot more about how that was achieved and what some of the learnings are from that. But I think it's important as we go through this session to remember why we're doing this. The economic aspects of this issue. There is a clear business case. The vast majority of businesses, there is a clear business case for taking action to reduce food loss and waste. It goes straight to the bottom line. Work over the last few years has shown that the median company has a 14-to-1 payback on taking steps to tackling food waste. And often those are really low cost or no cost actions that are required. So there is a really solid reason to do it. You just got to be aware of the issue and take some steps. And householders also benefit from reducing food waste. The average family with children in the UK wastes around £60 a month because of food waste. And there are obviously the environmental aspects, the greenhouse gas emissions, land, water and biodiversity loss. And then there are social impacts, right through from smallholder farmers in developing countries who are struggling to make a living, all the way through to householders who struggle to make ends meet and to provide their families with a healthy, sustainable diet. We've got plenty of expertise on this webinar today to help us explore the learning from the UK, what progress has been made, what worked and what didn't. As I said, when we started working on food waste in the UK, we started with measurement back in 2007. And it's fair to say that the approach that's been taken in the UK has really helped inform best practice, and it helped to inform the strategy that's been developed by the Champions 12.3 initiative, the Target, Measure, Act approach. So set targets, set goals, it sets your ambition. Measure, because then once you measure, you know where your problems are and you can take action, and then that leads to action. And as part of the Champions 12.3 coalition, we've developed a roadmap to help us understand how we might get to achieving a halving of food waste by 2030. And key to that is obviously the Target, Measure, Act approach, but that everybody has a role to play. Governments, businesses, citizens, we all have a role to play. And the other key bit of that is that it really requires collaboration. And we're going to be far more effective if we collaborate. And I think that is going to be a strong message that comes through today. This year, 2021, is really feels quite important, not only because we had a dreadful year last year, but this year is the Food Systems Summit in September. And that is a massive opportunity to put food waste onto the agenda and to make sure that we really focus on it. We understand the implications and we use it as a way to raise the awareness and to take action. And I'm involved in the work to pull together the ideas around food waste as part of that summit. And the idea of the Food Systems Summit is we come up with game-changing ideas that are really going to radically improve the food system. And one of the key game changers that we're coming up with is built on the UK experience. It's about getting as many countries as possible around the world to commit to public-private partnerships, to working with the industry, to collaborating, and to trying to make sure that we actually take action, not just at the household level, but through the supply chain to tackle food waste. And as part of that, I'll put in a quick plug. We are looking for partners. I know there are a lot of people from around the world listening to this webinar. If you think your country or your government might be interested in being involved as part of that whole exercise, then please get in touch afterwards. But I'm now going to hand over to Marcus, who I know very well over for many, many years, who's going to talk a little bit more about the detail about what's been happening in the UK. Marcus.
Well, thank you, Liz, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak today about the Great British Success Story. You know, the UK, as you've said, has got a very impressive track record on tackling food loss and waste, and possibly might be leading the world. And since 2007, that 27% reduction that Liz talked about is 1.7 million tonnes per year less food waste, and that would actually fill the Royal Albert Hall in London 34 times. If you've ever seen the proms taking place there, you can see what a big hall that is and what that full 34 times would be. The value of that food that we're no longer throwing away is £4.7 billion per year. So that's a huge amount that we're saving. So this is good for the planet and good for the economy. In fact, the greenhouse gas emissions that we're now avoiding are the same as 2.4 million cars. When I looked up the number of new cars put on the road in the UK in 2019, it was 2.3 million. So in a normal sort of economic year, about the same number of cars coming onto the road is what we're avoiding the emissions of by preventing food waste. But what's worked? What's made us able to do that? And there's been a few critical factors in achieving this. The first is having the evidence and knowing where to focus. There's also having a pre-competitive trusted platform where we can bring government and business together. And then there's a strong consumer brand, Love Food Don't Waste, to drive citizen consumer behaviour change. That evidence, though, is probably the most important factor. Without that, I don't think we could achieve the success that we've achieved. So as Liz was saying, we know exactly what food is wasted where, who wastes it and why. We know that, as Liz said, 70% of it's in the home, but only 3% in retail. We know that the most wasted foods are potatoes, bread, milk, and poultry. And we know that 18 to 34-year-olds in cities waste the most food. So with that knowledge, we can really help people to prevent food waste. We can target. That knowledge is our most important weapon. The other part, business collaboration. Now, we created the Courtauld commitment as a trusted platform, and that brings the whole supply chain together with government and business to drive system change. And it's about system change. That agreement covers over 90% of the food that's put on the tables in the UK. And so if they all change, then the system changes. And it meant that we could have a common methodology to measure food waste, which means that we can target, measure, act at scale. So, target, measure, act at scale delivers system change through business collaboration. And then with the citizen behaviour change side through Love Headache Waste, there again, we use the evidence to target those who waste the food, the most wasted food items and the key behaviours. And we complement it with a programme aimed at changes in packaging design and labelling to make it easier for people to buy what they need and use what they buy. So it's the combination of all those things together that makes the difference. Now, at the same time, what didn't work? Well, working without evidence doesn't work. You can't change behaviours to prevent food loss and waste without understanding who wastes food and why. Focusing on awareness rather than behaviour change didn't work. We needed to show people how to change, and we needed to help them to change. Also, having the right policy framework is critical. If we didn't have the right policy framework, then things like confusing date labels, not having a common measurement methodology, a lack of a requirement to report food waste, and inconsistency in food waste collections, none of that helps to prevent food waste. Not working together. If a business goes it alone, rather than working with its often competitors, some will do well, but most will get left behind. Then there's focusing on action. We'll all be judged by our actions and our achievements, not our words. And action doesn't simply mean signing up to a voluntary agreement like Courtauld. It means committing to the targets and putting in place concrete action plans to achieve them. The world is watching us, and there won't be any place to hide. So it's critical that when people sign up to these voluntary commitments, they're held to account. Otherwise, they're not really proper voluntary agreements. In 2017, we actually reported in the UK that food waste had gone up. So you have to be on the case all the time. And then we revised the approach because of that. We worked with the Institute of Grocery Distribution to develop a common measurement methodology. We developed the UK food waste reduction roadmap to bring all of the businesses together. And we worked with businesses like Tesco, who we'll hear from in a minute, who mobilised their entire supply chain to work together to prevent food waste. Tesco played a big role in helping to move the UK. We also invested in more research to give us the insights. And we worked with organisations like the Food Standards Agency to simplify and clarify the date labels. So all of this and technical changes to packaging all helped to reduce food waste. And it's investing in that work, in what works, that delivers results. And providing enough funding is a critical issue to tackle something as important as food waste. Making a voluntary agreement like Courtauld or a behaviour change campaign like Love Headache Waste work takes a lot of work. And it needs to be funded. It takes cost to do it. The cost might seem perhaps high, but the payback is absolutely huge. I mentioned £4.7 billion per year we're saving. Why is it so important to do this? What motivates me? Well, we won't get to net zero, and we won't limit global warming to 1.5 degrees if we don't tackle food waste. If every person in the UK threw away no food waste for a day, it would be the same as taking 4,000 cars off the road for a whole year. Just get a sense of the scale of the impact. We're wasting 20 million slices of bread each day. If we didn't do that, that's the same climate change impact as planting 5.3 million trees. We're throwing away over 3 million glasses of milk a day, or equivalent of. If we didn't do that, that would be the same as planting 6 million trees. So there's a big impact here. Wasting food feeds climate change. And that's why we're running the first Food Waste Action Week in the UK, which was launched yesterday. And it's a week of action, encouraging small changes that will make a big difference for the planet. And whether it's in a restaurant kitchen or a home kitchen, people can reduce the food they waste and play their part in tackling climate change. And that's why food waste is at the heart of WRAP's plan for a sustainable planet, and why we all need to make tackling food waste a priority. We do need more investment in measures to tackle food waste in the home. With 70% in the UK and a lot of food waste around the world in the home, I really need to call on governments and international organizations, trust foundations, to prioritize funding and investing in tackling food waste in the home. If we all commit to this, if we all work together, I believe we can fix the food system and we can do our bit to help fight climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Liz Goodwin and Marcus Gover. Before handing it over to Ken Murphy from Tesco, I just wanted to remind you all that you can put your questions in the chat, and when Ken Murphy and Tristram Stewart is done, we will start the Q&A session. But now over to Ken Murphy, the CEO of Tesco.
Thank you, Espen, and thank you for inviting me here to speak today. For those of you who don't know me, I took over as CEO of Tesco in October 2020, so I'm relatively new to the role. And I think the first thing I think I was mentioned by Marcus and beforehand is that, of course, Tesco is deeply committed to reducing food waste and has really taken a leadership role. And I think I want to start off by saying that that commitment will only grow under my tenure. I'm as passionate about food waste reduction as the previous CEO was and as the business is today. So it's a really important part of our ESG agenda as a company. And, you know, I can say this about Tesco because I'm relatively new. What has really surprised me since I joined is just how much of a bias for action Tesco has over the PR element of it. So what we actually do as a company to reduce food waste dramatically outstrips the external perception I had before I joined the business. So I'm guessing the only reason that you're all joining us today is that you feel equally as passionate about food waste reduction as we do. So what I hope to do is talk you through actual experiences and actions that Tesco has taken and will be taking in the future to reduce food waste in the UK. Liz and Marcus both have shared with you the impact of food waste on the environment, so I'm not going to go over those numbers. We estimate that about 6.4 million tons of edible food gets wasted in the UK every year across households, hospitality, food service manufacturers and retailers. And Marcus has already talked about the vast waste of resources that has created as a consequence. So clearly the economic and the climate impact is enormous, but it also has social and local economic consequences too, which is pretty unforgivable. I've been really impressed how the nation has got behind the Marcus Rashford initiative to end food poverty. And we, Tesco, have doubled our donations to food banks during 2020 because of the huge surge in demand we saw from people who were living in food poverty during this year of unprecedented problems for a lot of families as a result of the pandemic. So what are we doing? What physically have we been doing to really tackle this problem? The UK as a country has cut food waste by 27% since 2007, and we're seeing an improvement internationally too. And I'm pleased to say that food businesses are making a difference and playing their part, both food retailers, growers, and manufacturers. And I'll talk a bit about the upstream supply chain and how they've been very supportive of our efforts in food waste reduction in a moment. Most companies and more companies are stepping up and not only setting targets for themselves internally, but are reporting their progress publicly. And of course, that is really important. Tesco was the first UK retailer to publish food waste data back in 2013, because as we know, what gets measured gets managed. Since then, we've started reporting food waste data for every market that we serve in. And we've, for example, more than halved the food waste in our 3 Central European markets. But this is an area where combined action and mutual support will drive the change we seek. So it's important and very welcome that our suppliers are also playing their part. 71 of our branded and own label suppliers are publishing food waste data alongside us. Collectively, they have cut more than 155,000 tons of waste from their operations in just 3 years. Always following a really simple but very clear strategy: target, measure, act. In 2017, Tesco engaged 28 of our own label suppliers to commit to Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 and to report their food waste figures publicly. This was the first time that a retailer engaged with its suppliers to publicly tackle food waste. In 2019, our approach was taken as a template for the 10 by 20 by 30 initiative in an effort to be a catalyst for the whole chain approach to fighting food loss and waste. To date, 54 UK suppliers have committed to half food waste and public reporting. In 2020, we extended the scope of reporting for our produce suppliers to include farm waste. This is beyond the scope of the SDG 12.3, but it's a big hotspot in the supply chain that we believe should be tackled and is one that's been difficult to measure what the true waste levels are. And so now we're working with the WWF to understand more about issues on farm loss and waste. I look forward to sharing more detail later this year on what else we can do at a farm level, learning from this research and insight, sharing best practice across our supply chain from farm to fork. As well as the bigger strategic interventions like our work with WWF, I'm really pleased too that we continue to look at those targeted interventions which will help our growers and our customers fight food waste. For example, it's estimated that 4.4 million potatoes are wasted in UK homes every year. So working with our supplier, Branston, we will soon significantly increase the number of stores where we sell unwashed potatoes, i.e. potatoes covered in mud. And many of you might be too young, but I do still remember having to wash potatoes as a child and then remarking that that chore miraculously disappeared. But of course, what we never realized that our forefathers knew was that dirty potatoes extend the shelf life of a potato by up to 5 days. So it's actually very environmentally important. And as I think the previous speakers have said, it's really all about understanding and education to help drive down food waste. So it's a simple but really important practical step that we're taking. But of course, tackling food waste is about all of us. So the fact that retail operations themselves account for a very relatively small quantity of food waste should be a call to arms and not a reason for complacency. I think, again, as was mentioned previously, over 70% of food waste occurs in the home. And therefore, there's a massive role we should all be playing together around trying to educate consumers and give them the tools to manage their food waste much more effectively. For example, we've made a straightforward commitment that any unsold food safe for human consumption in the UK retail operations shouldn't go to waste. Indeed, no food waste from Tesco in the UK has gone to landfill since 2009. In 1920, we are nearly 80% towards our goal that no food safe for human consumption will go to waste in our UK operations. Following the clear food waste hierarchy, where it cannot go to humans, it goes to animals to be fed into animal feed. And where this isn't possible, the energy is recovered through anaerobic digestion. Since I've joined Tesco, I've been impressed by the commitment to reduce food waste and loss. Steps, large and small, all laddering up to real change. But one of the most eye-catching initiatives is our community food connection. In partnership with food redistribution charity FareShare and the social enterprise Food Cloud, it's just been remarkable. We've donated over 100 million meals to thousands of local charities and community groups across the UK since 2012. Harnessing the power of technology through Food Cloud, redistributing food to local groups, stopping food which is fit for human consumption from going to waste. I should add too that the same charity infrastructure designed to redistribute food to charities on the front line helped us and continues to help us as we deliver food to communities through the very many challenges of COVID. And as I mentioned, this almost doubled in 2020 relative to 2019. I've talked about our supply chain in our own operations. However, in food waste terms, the big prize, as I mentioned, is tackling food waste at home. 71% of food waste happens in our homes. I thought it therefore might be useful to share some learnings for our No Time for Waste challenge at the end of last year. Designed to play a positive role in understanding food waste at home, we partnered with the environmental charity Hubbub to develop a 6-week pilot for 53 households, testing which interventions were most successful in cutting household food waste. We provided tools for participants to communicate directly with us and each other, sharing experiences, progress, and advice around meal planning, batch cooking, and storage. We even brought in recipe inspiration from Tesco's own expert chefs. And so what were the findings? Firstly, our participants averaged a staggering 76% reduction in food waste. 90% of them began to use all the food they bought. A simple step, obvious even, but a vital step. 88% changed how they stored food, crucial to extending product lifespan. And 62% of them cut their weekly food bill. In fact, the average saving per week was £16.50, which is equal to £858 a year. I hope you'll forgive me for stating the obvious, but all these changes, these small incremental improvements, better planning, better storage, add up to a massive impact on food waste. They're pretty simple stuff, but the impact is enormous. So our task for all of us here today in working to cut food waste in the home is about equipping customers with the knowledge and the tools to make a difference. So whatever your motivator for change, be it environmental or the injustice of food waste when others go hungry or something entirely different, we know our customers can and will save money too. So by way of conclusion, it's clear that there's still an enormous amount to do. However, I remain confident that we can rise to the challenge of halving global food waste by 2030. We don't have all the answers, but we do have the ambition, the energy, and above all, the commitment to collaboration. Working across our supply chain, in our own operations, and with our customers, we can and will make a lasting change. So if you are joining today's meeting and you're one of our suppliers, do come along on the journey with us. It's difficult, but it's really, really rewarding. And if you know a community group who would benefit from our food redistribution, please tell us. We're really, really happy to help. And if you're a customer who simply wants tips on how to save on food waste, we'd be very happy to help with that too. COVID-19 has really questioned the resilience of our supply chains, and customers, I hope and believe, are reappraising the value of food and how they shop and how they think about food. And as we look at kind of emerging from this lockdown and recovery, we would hope to exploit the kind of time people have taken to think about food to see a change in behaviors that could last well into the future. I'm really looking forward to COP26 in Glasgow and also the Food Summit in September. A massive opportunity to send a real message of the UK's intent to be a leader in this space. So with that, I just want to say thank you for the time and to pass you back to Espen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Pleasure listening to this as well. And the last intervention will be from Tristram Stewart. Tristram, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this great gathering. I'm going to give a slightly different angle to the success story of the United Kingdom. It's complementary to everything that we've heard, but it is distinct, because I think, since there will be people listening to this who are keen on replicating in their countries the recipe of success, I'm going to emphasize one of the elements that has certainly been my life for the last 20 years, and has also overlapped with the lives of pretty much everyone else on this panel. And that's the part of the food waste reduction movement that happened in the United Kingdom that we could characterize as the grassroots citizen mobilization element. I started campaigning on food waste, well, it's 20 years ago, when the idea of having the chief executive of Tesco, along with organizations funded by the government with millions of pounds of public money, was a very, very distant prospect. Quite the opposite. In most of the media coverage, it would be representatives from the British Retail Consortium who represent the supermarkets, belittling and trying to sort of diminish the idea that food waste was a massive problem. The world has completely changed. We now have a situation with the Sustainable Development Goals signed up by all the countries in the world that we're going to halve food waste by 2030. We have, as we've heard, had, well, it's actually, if you go by per capita, the British citizens have reduced by a third the amount of food they've wasted in their homes. And of course, it's impossible now to be a big food company without tackling food waste and having a really substantial strategy. How did that come about? Those millions of pounds of public money that was spent came after a few years of really vigorous campaigning in the public sphere. The media storm around food waste is, I think, one of the principal ingredients that gave rise to many of the other things that flowed thereafter. The launch of a national coalition of NGOs, which was really crystallized at the Feeding the 5,000 event that we organized in 2009, the year I published a book on food waste, which brought together the likes of FareShare, the nascent organization I founded, Feedback, Friends of the Earth, ActionAid, the Farmers Union. This really gave rise to a kind of the idea that food waste was both a scandal, an environmental catastrophe, one that we really could solve in our own individual daily lives, but that also spoke to something larger than just our own personal behavior change. There was an attitude that, of course, we are responsible for changing our own behavior, but this was a movement that spoke truth to power. It looked not just at the food waste in people's homes, but the scandalous level of food waste on the part of the supermarkets and on the part of their suppliers. We focused on the issue that food donations were a tiny percentage of the amount of food that was being wasted, looked at the fact that there were many charities crying out for this food, and the result was much better engagement. And now we see the likes of Tesco who are committing to donate all of their fit for consumption surplus food. Now, I think that commitment, of course, was part of the collaborative RAP-led court-hold commitment that we know so well and has really helped to bring the whole industry along together. But it also came about as a result of a vigorous, even combative campaign to call those companies who are in a position of power to account on the issue of food waste. It was in this context that we challenged Tesco to report transparently how much food they wasted, and they voluntarily agreed to do so. I believe collaboration is part of the reason for that, but also, let's face it, competition. It made Tesco look a lot better in the public eye that they took this front foot forwards attack on food waste. It has resulted in Ken now being one of the champions of this target. And I think that public, audacious, citizen-led campaigning was a really essential ingredient. We made it cool to tackle food waste, inspired the likes of Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall and Jamie Oliver to run entire series on the issue of food waste, showing not just what companies were doing, but of course the great recipes and things that people could be doing at home to tackle food waste. And I think it was that kind of, that very grassroots feel that gave legitimacy to many people on the issue of food waste, the idea that this is our responsibility, but also we need the industry and government to move with us. It's also, of course, one of the key ingredients behind what I think is one of the most exciting elements of this whole movement, and which hasn't been touched on much, and that is the entrepreneurial vibrancy that has arisen around the issue of food waste. We now have companies like Olio, Too Good To Go. I see that representatives from Kitch are here today. These are the entrepreneurs who have invested money, time, energy, and solution building into tackling food waste. And the United Kingdom has more of these companies than any other country of our size. But it's not just UK now, it's international. And there are dozens and dozens of companies like this, Winnow and others, that their whole business model is to tackle food waste. Of course, my own company, Toast Ale, is part of that movement. We upcycle food that otherwise would have been wasted into beer and then pour our profits into charities like Feedback that are tackling food waste. And there are many other companies now whose entire purpose is to bring citizens, consumers along on the issue of food waste. And it's not just a business, it's part of that awareness raising, spreading, and calling the industry to account on its food waste. Policy has been mentioned. I do want to touch on a couple of the key policies that I think are an essential ingredient of the UK success story. In 2013, as a result of vigorous campaigning, the Groceries Code Adjudicator Act was passed in the UK. This was seismic and world leading. It meant that supermarkets were no longer allowed to cancel orders at the last minute, with the result that food was going to be wasted and the cost was going to fall on suppliers, which of course the Competition Commission identified as a massive problem, both of injustice, but also of food waste within the food industry. This made it illegal, essentially, for supermarkets to offload their waste onto those suppliers. We haven't talked too much about the international dimension, but I do want to touch on it here because partly the diversity of this group is not actually representative of the champions as a whole, but also to identify that much of the food waste caused in the United Kingdom actually happens overseas, because of course we're a country that imports net by value more than half of our food. So when I went to visit farmers in Kenya who supply the supermarkets in the United Kingdom with green beans and other produce, seeing that they were wasting half and sometimes 100% of their harvests as a result of cosmetic standards created here in the UK or order cancellations at the last minute. That tonnage of vegetables, that doesn't even come into the accounts when we look at food waste in the UK, when we look at all the wonky bananas that get wasted overseas in the name of, again, our cosmetic standards and order cancellations. Those are not on the books, as it were. So when we hear that 70% of food waste happens at the consumers level and only 30% at industry, that actually leaves out quite a lot of the waste in the industry level. And focusing on that, acknowledging, of course, that we have responsibilities to cut food waste, not just in our own homes, but all the way up the supply chains, I think is absolutely key. To bring this to a conclusion, I think that the celebratory element of tackling food waste, the idea that we can all eat and enjoy food rather than seeing it being thrown away, is something that is universally compelling. It speaks to my favorite word, which is the word companion. Companion, etymologically, com is with in Latin and pan is bread. And companionship, the sharing of food to build friendship, is something that is actually a universal human behavior. Indeed, it is a universal great ape behavior. And the idea that we can use food that would otherwise be thrown away, surplus food, to share with our fellow humans, both on a domestic level, on a national level, but also on an international level. The idea that good companionship, the ensuring that food gets eaten and shared rather than thrown away, I think is the lens through which we can build not just the solution to food waste specifically, but also to try to fix some of those broken elements of our food system. The idea that people are left hungry, the fact that we chop down rainforests to grow our food. Those are all instances of bad companionship. And I believe that it's deep within us, biologically, genetically deep within us, to want to strive towards that ideal that all that food should be used and enjoyed. And with that, I feel like businesses, governments, and citizens can indeed collaborate on the solution to food waste, but also some of those other big social and environmental problems that we face.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Thank you for all. And now we are ready to move on to the Q&A session. But before that, I just wanted to say to all our participants then, the 4 excellent speakers, besides being professionals, they are also champions. And if you want to know more about the Champions 12.3 work, you can look at the website, and you can also join as a friend of Champion. But look it up if you have an interest in it. I want to start with a question to Ken Murphy. What would you say to businesses who are still reluctantly to publish their or to be public about their food waste? And how have you convinced your suppliers to join in this experiment, you could say?
Well, I think that, let me start by answering the second question first, which I think might help to inform what I would say to people who are reluctant to share their data. Look, I think Tristan put it into great context, which is, I think that this has moved from the periphery of people's consciousness to the front. I think that everybody now is becoming aware of the environmental and social and economic damage done by food waste and by practices right the way through the supply chain, from literally from farm to fork, that are contributing to that. And you know, Tristan is right. There was historically and still is food wasted because consumers don't like the shape of a particular fruit or a particular vegetable. We're, for example, just starting to launch our range of imperfectly perfect fruit and vegetables to try and really combat that issue, because, you know, there's nothing wrong with the product. It just doesn't look very aesthetically pleasing. But we would urge suppliers to kind of really wake up and smell the coffee and say, this is no longer a kind of an optional thing to do. We think this is really important to our consumers. It's really important as a part of their social and moral obligations as a business and as a part of the society we live in. So, you know, we get very little resistance, if I'm honest, from our supplier base. They really understand and get the importance and the urgency now. So I would worry for any, you know, business who is still reluctant to really get on board with this.
Thank you very much. Marcus, around the current innovative technologies and apps that has been successful in the UK, could you expand a little on that, but maybe also say something about what gaps may there exist in addressing food loss and waste technologically?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as we're saying, you know, the critical thing is having the evidence and where to focus, and when you know that, how to measure. And so some of the innovation which is helping people to measure is really quite important. And you know, for example, in a restaurant kitchen, it could be quite hard to measure the food waste there with everything else going on. And there have been some innovations there which have helped chefs to be able to track their food waste. And once they're aware of it and they realize the cost, that drives action. Equally, as Tristan was saying, there's been some excellent innovation around using technology to connect people to where the food surplus is, so that it can be it can get to people who want to eat it. So I found my daughter taking advantage. She lives in London, and she started using some of the apps that connect her and her flatmates with surplus food, and they love it. They can easily get to a shop or somewhere that's got excess food and make sure it gets eaten. So there have been some quite good developments there. But the critical thing, I think, I mean, Tristan's right that it's not all about food waste in the home. There is a lot in the home, and 30% isn't in the home, and that's a huge number still. So, you know, but to help people in the home, to help them make better use of the food they have, I think there is also some scope there to use some of the technology to help them know what they're buying. So we're this week advising people to take something called a Shelfie, which is just using the technology they've already got in their phone to have a picture inside the fridge to take with them when they shop, so they can remember what they're trying to buy. Because just making a list is one of the simple things that makes a huge difference. And using some of what we now considered simple technology to help with that can really be quite an advantage. So things which are going to make it easier for people to plan, to buy what they need, to use better recipes, to understand how to use leftovers, but also to perhaps be more confident. So one of the big things people can do is freezing food. Once you put something in the freezer, everything changes. So helping people to understand some of those, I think there's some scope for technology to help with that. And the Love Food Hate Waste websites and mobile platforms will do that, but there are other things that do that as well.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Tristram, if you could recommend one action to consumer-facing companies to reduce food waste, what would that be? One action.
To consumer-facing companies? Was that the question? Okay, well, I think Ken touched on the core issue that that provides attention for any consumer-facing company in this sector. As he mentioned, 62%, I think it was, of the participants in the recent study that they did saved money as a result of reducing, of being part of this food waste reduction challenge. And I think he said they saved something like £16.50 each. That's £16.50 less spent at the till in Tesco. That means less revenue for the company concerned. And therein lies the paradox. At the moment, of course, and this doesn't carry any form of judgment, the business model of a company in the retail sector is to sell as much as possible, to pile shelves high, to create that image of cornucopian abundance, which, as a result of millions of dollars of investment, is what businesses know triggers the human response to take. It's a very deeply entrenched biological impulse. So to ask a company essentially to encourage people to buy less, that is asking a lot. And it's what lies behind, I suppose, a lot of the foot dragging within the industry, is that all of that food that consumers waste was bought from businesses. And the fact that it got wasted makes very little difference to the profitability of those sales. And so I suppose coming to terms with that, acknowledging it, and nevertheless making a robust business. And I think the way in which you do that is the way in which I think probably Tesco and many others have done, and that is that to make it part of your brand narrative that you're taking responsibility, that you accept that there is food waste in your supply chains, in your companies, but also in the houses of your consumers, and that you're deeply enmeshed within the responsibility for that waste, whether it's in your stores or up and down your supply chain. You are part of that problem. And to take responsibility for it and get people to appreciate your brand as a result of those steps. So I think a way of internalizing the benefits to your brand and avoiding, frankly, the reputational hazard of not doing so. And in Feedback's world, this was a very big tool that we played, is that if you were a company and you were not doing what we felt was your responsibility to do, you got into the media at the wrong end and had your name splashed on the headlines or on the television as an egregious waster of food. So seeing that as among the cost savings of of tackling food waste, I think would probably be, I think that's the one challenge that a consumer food business might see. And being transparent about it is a key part of that. I think it's just worth noting, I know this isn't exactly a direct answer, but it relates very closely. The government of the United Kingdom was due to have a consultation on the transparent reporting of food waste by big companies as a mandatory requirement. That got postponed as a result of COVID. It was supposed to come out, I think, in November of last year. This would, I believe, be a game changer. If everyone had to report like Tesco does, it would allow, I mean, we've heard from Marcus and Liz that it's key to know where the food is being wasted. That still remains an area of deep opacity in many respects. We don't actually know where all the food is. If we all knew, then all of those great businesses investing in tackling food waste would know where to put their attention. An entrepreneur like myself, you know, finding out where the bread is being wasted so we can go and brew it into beer, it would help the whole industry move along. So being part of that, when the consultation does finally come through, encouraging the government to bring that mandatory reporting as a legal requirement, I think would help everyone move along, not just internally within companies, but across the industry.
Thank you very much. Liz, you touched upon the UN Food Systems Summit later this year. What will be the outcome obligating governments, businesses, if we are to be successful in halving food loss and waste in 2030, and not just having a food system summit that was nice to have?
Well, I think it's going to be building on some of the things that have been said. You know, we're working on a number of these game changer ideas. One is around getting more countries to actually committing to doing the Target Measure Act, but also to working with the businesses in their countries. And as Tristram says, requiring them to measure and to report and to take action. So rolling out the sorts of initiatives that Tesco has been doing with its suppliers in every country around the world. So it becomes the norm, it becomes mainstream. I think that extra transparency of what food is being wasted up and down supply chains will be fantastic. We're also looking at things like, you know, can we ban or can we advocate for countries to ban food waste going to landfill? Certainly start taxing it, but ultimately ban it. You know, it should never be, food should never be waste. And that's a concept we're increasingly talking about. At the end of the day, what's going to make this a successful food system summit and not just a talking shop where everyone has a nice time and goes back to their virtual home, which is probably where they were anyway. At the end of the day, it needs countries and businesses to stand up and say, yeah, I'm going to be part of this. So that's a really important thing, to have a sufficient number of countries and companies who are actually committed and prepared to put their heads above the parapet and say, yeah, this is far too serious. We can't continue as we have done.
Thank you very much. Ken, do your suppliers of own label products have to give any surplus away to charities, or are they allowed to sell it? If the latter, do you have any set guidelines for prospective purchases of such surplus?
Well, we're working more and more closely with suppliers. It's much harder for suppliers to do that because they just don't have the same access to distribution network that we do. The other thing is they produce to our demand. So I think one of the points that Tristram made was around you know, the fact that we have a much tighter relationship with suppliers now. We give them much more reliable demand forecasts. We stick to them. We take the food that they produce that we commit to take, and we create long-term relationships with them. We know there are certain producers like Keelings that have developed fantastic techniques. For example, they can grow their apples and put those apples to sleep for 6 months through a kind of a synthetic process and then wake them back up off season. And they're actually as good, if not better, than they were when they were picked. So there's these kind of improvements happening. For example, some of the farmers, we have a supplier in Kenya called Flamingo that have set up kitchens in their packing houses to make soups from surplus vegetables. They've donated surpluses to local schools, and surplus beans and broccoli, etc., have been put into compost. That would have been used as compost have now been used to create hot school meals. So we are seeing the trickle-down effect into the supply chain of this focus on reducing food waste. Would I say that it's at the level we need it to be, not yet. But there are some real clear signs of engagement right the way through the supply chain on this.
Thank you very much. Mark?
One point actually, sorry, just to finish on it, is that one of the things that we need to, as an industry, become much better at is how to deal with bumper harvests. So one of the things you learn when you get into the food supply chain is that nature is unpredictable. And so you see these kind of troughs and peaks in terms of food production. So we're really trying to attune our pricing models to make sure that there's more consumption and demand during bumper harvests, and then we kind of calm it down during normal or lower harvest yields. So sorry, that was just the last point.
No, thank you so much. Marcus, it seems that people are losing their cooking skills a lot of places around the world. Are there any particular effective models of teaching kids in the United Kingdom or other countries in this sphere?
I think you're right that there is a fear of food safety with people, and knowing how to store food and how to prepare food and cook food is a critical issue. And we've taken steps to help that in a number of ways. So better communication from the retailer selling the food on the packaging, for a start, for instance, is a good way, telling people how to store it. And most of the retailers have helped with that. And this is one part of that, so that people know what to do with food and how to keep it. Knowing to keep potatoes in the dark, for instance, that's not something that's known by enough people. I don't think we're doing enough, perhaps, to get younger people to understand some of those basic things. And we've been trying to work with some of the younger people through organisations like the Scouting Group and so on, others like that, to try to reach young people in different ways. But the basic, as you say, the basic cooking skills, more could be done there. I know from my own children that the cooking they were taught in school was really quite basic. They really learned to cook at home rather than in school. So perhaps more could be done. At the same time, though, the schools have an awful lot to cover as well. So that is a challenge. But we've also run programs where we've tried to provide training to individuals on preventing food waste, which is usually around storage and cooking and leftovers and so on. It's quite effective, but to do it at scale is really quite hard. We need really a sort of movement, as Tristan was talking about, to perhaps try to mobilize that type of thing. For us to provide trainers to work with people can be effective, but it's not really viable at scale. So I think we are looking for a solution that can work at scale in that space, and maybe technology can help there too.
Thank you very much. And this was the last answer. So I want to thank all the panelists, all the participants, so our great team at the World Resources Institute, Gillian, Emily, and Molly, who did all the work behind the scene. We will answer the questions that we didn't have enough time to answer today mail. And as I said, the recording will be available at the Champions 12.3 website. Stay tuned for the next Food Loss and Waste event at March 12th. That will be hosted between IFPRI, the Royal Danish Embassy in Washington, and the World Resources Institute, focusing on incentivizing food loss and waste at the UN Food Systems Summit. Thank you all, and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening.